The 8 chapters following Scrambled Eggs are all over the place. It's a new school year and all 6 characters are in a very different emotional headspace than they were just a short time earlier. And so this span of chapters is used to illustrate those new blossoming dynamics, highlight how much everyone has changed, and pave the way for the next big arc. Because the Sisters' War is coming and it is going to be a doozy. This also fittingly feels like the start of a new story entirely. While the big turning point for Fuutarou happened at the end of the final exams, and there's quite a bit from that arc along with Scrambled Eggs that feeds into this intermission, this is the first time things have really stabilized for him since the beginning of the story, if I'm being honest. For the first time ever, he's pretty secure in his position. While he is still wrestling over his own feelings and the feelings of these 5 idiots, there's nothing there that requires his immediate focus. He can afford to take his time and feel things out, and as he does, he starts seeing things he didn't see before that'll influence the decisions he makes for the remainder of the series. Right out of the gate, we are reminded that the cast will be graduating high school at the end of this school year. With how the series began and how it's progressed, this gives the audience the impression that we're halfway through the story. And with that impression, it encourages you to look back at how constant the momentum in the story has been. The pacing and development has moved at a consistently brisk pace, and it all ties in nicely. Which makes the next bit hit a little harder. At the end of Scrambled Eggs, Ichika had set aside her nurturing role and had made the decision to act more selfishly. So even though all the girls had already expressed their intention to get jobs and ease some of the burden off her, it still paints her ultimatum in a harsh light. Finishing off chapter 69, Ichika talks to Fuutarou about how everyone is getting jobs and growing up, taking their first step into adulthood. And because everyone will be doing their own thing, they won't be able to spend as much time together. Their father pulled some strings to keep them all together and make it more convenient for all 6 of them to maintain their jobs and study sessions. There's 2 interesting things to note here. Fuutarou is trying to be the same curmudgeon he was at the start of the series, and Itsuki is the only one who sees this as normal because she's the only one who had been his classmate in the previous school year. The theme of this part of the story is that you don't really know someone until you've seen them in all sorts of situations. Fuutarou started learning about the Quints pretty quickly thanks to the fireworks arc, the bonfire arc, and most recently their trip to the hot spring. But this is the first time they're seeing Fuutarou in what could be considered his own natural habitat. The first half of the story was all about Fuutarou learning about the girls, and now the shoe is on the other foot. And the only one with any advantage is Itsuki, who is also the only one who had ever been to his house. Anyway, the class is more focused on the 5 identically beautiful girls and are being really intrusive with their questions. This is when we meet Takeda. We'll get more into his deal later, but right now all we need to know is that he sparkles, which is artistic shorthand for being an extravagant extrovert. He gets the class to knock it off with the questions while admitting that he is interested in the Quints as well. The class officially starts and Yotsuba jumps the gun to nominate herself for class rep. The teacher decides to go ahead and select the male rep, but nobody volunteers. We do see a few people whisper about Takeda being the natural pick. He thinks so too, because as soon as Yotsuba starts to nominate someone, he starts to stand. But she nominates Fuutarou instead. Of course she does. Her sisters were just discussing how they want the rest of the class to see Fuutarou the same way they do, which would make this harem setup a lot more complicated now that I think about it. And they believe that forcing him to lead the class is a good way to show him off to the rest of the class. But it's also a good way to put more on Fuutarou's plate that'll take time away from his studying, so he tries to get out of it to no avail. Alright, so Takeda is one of the most clever characters in the entire series. We find out later that he's always been right behind Fuutarou in test scores and actually surpassed him during the final exams, when Fuutarou's scores slipped. And while he doesn't know the Quints very well, he has always been aware of them. His father is friends with Maruo, and had things gone differently, could have been the one chosen to be their tutor. That's part of his deal. He knows the high standards Maruo has for academics and would see Fuutarou's tutoring job as the ultimate acknowledgement that he is the top student. Takeda sees himself as Fuutarou's academic rival, and he can also see how much the girls trust him. He's not in the story a whole lot, but every single time he appears, he demonstrates how perceptive he is and how much he's been able to notice about Fuutarou's relationship with the girls. After his bathroom encounter with Takeda, Fuutarou runs into Miku, who basically asks him what 5 things he would wish for. She's asking this so that all 5 of them can get him something for his birthday that'll satisfy his wishes. He wants money, strength, energy, more sleep, and luck. Before this can go any further, they're interrupted by some girls looking for Yotsuba. Their string of blunders annoys Fuutarou, who gives them a quick lesson about using the accessories to tell the 5 girls apart. The girls get way too friendly with Fuutarou for Miku's liking, and she's forced to sulk as the girls drag him away to help find Yotsuba. Itsuki understands Miku's jealousy and also understands Yotsuba's reason for nominating him as class rep. She sees how this will help him continue to change, and she also reflects on how much she must have changed in order to warm up to someone as rude as him. As the chapter wraps up, we see the girls discussing Fuutarou's wishes as various classmates use him as a medium to talk to the Quints. His birthday is coming up, and it's becoming clear that things are going to get hectic before anything gets better. Yotsuba has the hardest time finding a job as her mind wanders to all the stupid things that she would likely have to deal with if she was a cashier, and I think Fuutarou and I said everything that needs to be said about this the last time this came up. The 4 girls fret over finding jobs, dealing with Ichika's return to her original selfish self, and the prospect of having to deal with their dad alone. Then Itsuki spouts off a platitude about finding a job that'll help her grow, and Nino assumes she's talking about free food, which Itsuki takes as Nino lumping her in with Fuutarou, since that was one of his motives for working at the bakery. Speaking of that bakery, they happen to be hiring, and both Nino and Miku jump at the possibility. Miku has her true motives written all over her face, but Nino is a little more sly. Baking is her biggest passion after all, so she can play it off as a coincidence that it happens to be Fuutarou's workplace. Which just goes to show that as open and honest as Nino is with Fuutarou, she hasn't given her sisters the same courtesy. Miku and Nino compete for the position, and of course Nino wins. But notice that she never belittles Miku for this. She may have boasted about trampling over her rivals, but that means something different to her than it does Ichika. Nino wants to be the best, and kicking Miku while she's down would turn any victory going forward into a consolation prize. That's why she continues to be nice to Miku. She knows Miku would never screw her over, and so she won't screw Miku over. They are more or less on the same page. The difference is in their personalities. Nino is extremely confident. She knows she's a good cook, she knows she's hot stuff, and that Fuutarou should count himself lucky. That's why she sees all of this as her way of making Fuutarou fall for her. Meanwhile, Miku is much more humble and has far lower self-esteem. So she bounces back and gets a job at the rival bakery because she's determined to be someone Fuutarou could fall for. The irony is that Miku's approach to self-improvement can maintain its benefits even if things with Fuutarou never work out. Meanwhile, Nino is setting herself up for devastation if Fuutarou never accepts her feelings. Both of them are better off than Ichika, but I'll get to why later. Nino has a serious advantage now that she is working with Fuutarou, and assures that she will have more opportunities to spend time with him than any of her sisters. This advantage has not gone unnoticed by Miku, who seeks to use it for everyone's benefit. She commissions Nino to use her time at work to get a better idea of what Fuutarou would want for his birthday. She's putting a lot of trust in Nino, almost as much as she put in Ichika before. Miku has no reason to not trust Nino, which makes Nino a little self-conscious. This is proof that Miku values Fuutarou's happiness and genuinely wants him to have a good birthday. Nino is capable of finding out what Fuutarou wants, getting it for him, and lying to the others so they give him gifts he doesn't want. This would help put her in the lead, but also be a betrayal of the trust they have in each other. So of course Nino never even entertains this idea. She merely ponders how complacent Miku seems to be. Miku continues to act selflessly, doing things entirely for Fuutarou's benefit and not her own. But again, this actually gives Miku an advantage in life. Nino is acting more selfishly, which only has short-term benefits. And I think she's beginning to realize it here. Otherwise, she wouldn't have the sense of urgency that Ichika or Miku are going to swoop him away if she lets up at all. This whole chapter, Fuutarou barely even makes eye contact with her. It makes sense to us that he still doesn't know how to act around her and is trying to keep things professional. When she fishes for compliments about her hair, he compliments how practical it is. When she shows off at work, he distances himself from her since there's nothing he can contribute. She's working her ass off to impress the boss and impress Fuutarou and get everything ready for this big reservation with a food critic named May. And at the end of chapter 71, Nino continues to overtly flirt with Fuutarou, and the two spot the mysterious food critic who has come to visit, and the two share a laugh realizing that it's just Itsuki with a face mask. Itsuki is the Japanese word for May, by the way, so Itsuki has to be a dumb dork if she thought this would ever work as a disguise. Especially since she knows both Fuutarou and Nino work here. Even Fuutarou was able to tell right away at a distance. Anyway, while making these preparations, she makes a mistake, a small one, but one she's not prone to making. This is one of the only times we ever see her make mistakes because she's overextending herself. And it's not even helping her achieve her ultimate goal of stealing Fuutarou's heart. But Fuutarou has taken notice in a way he wouldn't have earlier in the story. Fuutarou rarely ever shows his vulnerability. He always hypes up his prowess and has spent numerous chapters hyping up how difficult work can be, which makes him look pathetic when the girls find the work easier than he did. He's made a lot of mistakes at this job and begins showing Nino. It's not that he's trying to cheer her up, he's waking her up to the harsh realities of work and how fallible even the best workers can be. He's just looking out for her as her senpai. In this vulnerability, he's honest with her. One thing he's learned from all these jobs is that he's not good at them. He's only good at studying. He emotionally stunted himself in the pursuit of academic achievement, and so this was the first time anyone had ever confessed to him. As touching as this moment is, it further highlights Nino's immaturity and her fears. He offers to give her an answer and she asks him to wait, reiterating how much she thinks he doesn't like her and how much she still wants to show him. She wants him to learn more about her and how much she loves him. But she never says that she wants to learn more about his feelings. I think this is why she ultimately fails, and it's a lesson she learns too little too late. Chapter 72 is focused on Yotsuba, and it's a chapter that defines her role in the story, her relationship with Fuutarou, and by extension later comes to define Fuutarou as well. At the beginning of the chapter, all the sisters are suspicious of Nino since she's in a good mood despite failing her task of finding out what Fuutarou wants for his birthday. Yotsuba's response is to ask their classmates. But shocker, none of the other students know anything about him. Some of them haven't even bothered learning his name. The only one with any clue is Takeda, who is more familiar with pre-Quint super student Fuutarou, and so he suggests not giving him a gift because he doesn't like gifts. When Yotsuba asks some of the girls, they turn the tables on her. Because they spend time with each other, know more about each other than any of the other students, and because she personally nominated him to be class rep, a rumor has started that they are going out. It's funny in hindsight that the first person to really confront Yotsuba with her feelings are two characters who don't even have names. They even suggest that Fuutarou wouldn't be opposed to the idea, which throws Yotsuba right back into her internal conflict that she's been struggling with all series. Naturally, she gets all self-conscious about this. We see this in the next scene where she and Fuutarou have to clean up after gym class. Fuutarou is exhausted, but Yotsuba isn't, so she insists on carrying things. And because she's all flustered, she insists on carrying things by herself. Fuutarou is fine with this, but is determined to carry the heaviest stuff since he is a man and that's what men do. But he is also a weak and tired man, and so he and Yotsuba end up carrying things together anyway, which just puts more fuel on the rumor fire. Yotsuba nearly asks Fuutarou what he thinks before the others interrupt. Sometime later, she pleads with Ichiki to take over as class rep. She has a hard time bringing up the rumor, leading to a little gag where Ichiki thinks the rumor involves poking, because the Japanese word for going out is similar to the Japanese word for poking. Well, guess what, translators? Poking is also a euphemism for fucking in English, so yeah. This rumor is really bothering her because she's trying to not be in love with him, which is really hard for someone who loved him all this time. And that's why she's telling Ichiki and not anyone else. She's still burdening Ichiki with this knowledge and responsibility instead of just admitting to her own feelings. And later on, this turns into a self-destroying prophecy. She's not being honest because she doesn't want to get in Miku's way. She doesn't want to get in Miku's way because she hasn't been honest, and because of that, feels unworthy. And all this because she wanted the rest of the class to see Fuutarou the way the sisters do. Of course, we don't get any of Ichiki's thoughts or comments about this because that would spoil the big reveal at the end of Sister War, but we are fast approaching the breaking point where Ichiki takes matters into her own hands and ignores Yotsuba's wishes. In the next scene, Fuutarou tries being an overachiever again. He finishes all his work and then asks Yotsuba to give him half of what she has left. But the way he worded it is similar to a Japanese expression of marriage, which prompts her to ask what she was going to ask before. She doesn't even give him time to answer before she tries lying. She says she hates him and tells him to go away, but he sees right through the lie. She ends up telling him about the rumor and he shrugs it off. He doesn't know why they would think that, but he also doesn't really know anything about love to begin with. Yotsuba even remembers what he said all the way back in chapter 3. He says it again before lowering his guard and admitting that he's changed. Nino's confession, Miku's actions in the last arc, the Bell Kisser. Because of the impact of these girls, he can no longer stay as cynical as he was before. He doesn't tell Yotsuba what exactly made him change, so she gets self-conscious again, only for Fuutarou to deflate that little bit of hope that may have appeared. In fact, he states that there's not a specific person, which is true since there are at least 2 people directly involved in this change of heart. And the fact Yotsuba mentions Miku by name is just more evidence that Miku has liked him all along, something Fuutarou was starting to suspect after the prior arc. This is when Yotsuba gives a massive pledge to him. She's glad he no longer sees romance as stupid, and hopes that one day he'll fall in love, and that no matter who that is, no matter how long it takes, she will support him with everything she's got. Fuutarou points out that she's getting ahead of herself, and boy, he does not know how right he is. He hasn't made up his mind yet, and so this level of support isn't really needed. And we see in the final arc that Yotsuba breaks this promise too. With such a simple phrase, he is challenging her. Can she really support his decision with all her heart if it means upsetting one or more of her sisters? Isn't she already holding herself back? Regardless, this pledge of undying support is what Fuutarou will eventually equate to love, which is why he repeats Yotsuba's words later on in the series. Yotsuba is once again pestered by the girls, but this time she can confidently say that the rumor is unfounded and that they will never go out. This pledge has helped give her closure, so she can break her own heart to support Fuutarou so long as he chooses one of her sisters. And the possibility that he may choose her is one she has to purge from her mind if she's going to give this her all. Oh, the irony, because this pledge is what prevents her from accepting Fuutarou's feelings when he actually does confess. Quintessential Quintuplets, and by extension the entire harem genre, almost seems purpose-built to ameliorate some of the issues found in love triangles. But in doing so, when those problems do arise, it's amplified. One common issue with love triangles, especially mock triangles with foregone conclusions and an unreciprocated third party, is character assassination. In the hands of a less competent writer, this would be character assassination, but Neji Haruba is more than competent and gets a lot of mileage out of this regression in Ichika's character. This side of Ichika may be new to Fuutarou, which is why he doesn't immediately suspect foul play, even though he is suspicious. But it is not a new side of Ichika. This is a character quirk she had previously set aside when she decided to grow up, and now thanks to Yotsuba's encouragement, this side of her has returned. Yotsuba said it herself. Ichika used to be a bully who would steal anything the other girls liked, whether it be candy, stickers, toys, and yes, even boys. In doing so, it rationalizes Ichika's actions while directly associating this side of her with her childhood and by extension her immaturity. Despite all her posturing early on in the story, the selfish little kid who wanted everything her sisters had was still there waiting to be unleashed. Chapter 74 is all about how these walls and limitations deteriorate right in front of our eyes while Fuutarou is too busy focusing on the mock exams. And the first impression you might get is that Ichika is not smooth. Not being smooth in this situation can be nerve-wracking. I know from experience. She keeps giving him lies, excuses, and half-truths, all of which Fuutarou ignores if he notices at all, which inadvertently pushes Ichika even further. She's not being subtle, but the lack of a desired response causes her to double down. They do talk about Fuutarou's challenge, which I'll break down in the next section, but suffice to say that Ichika isn't surprised. She was actually in the same class with Takeda, and she doesn't want to talk about the mock exams because she wants to talk about Fuutarou's birthday. She does break the ice when he notices her glasses. The movie she was in, the same one she auditioned for at the start of the series, finally premiered and she's gotten quite popular. So she's been wearing glasses and has been keeping a Miku wig on hand to avoid the weebs, which is totally ridiculous because a Miku wig would realistically attract more weebs. But what can I say? I prefer girls with long hair. And then Fuutarou tells her about how he saw through Miku's disguise. And you can imagine that it takes a lot of composure not to cry, especially with what happens next. He sees the others across the way and starts talking about them, and everything he says just makes Ichika more and more desperate. This is the crux of Ichika's role in this section of the story. She is more selfish than any of the girls. Everyone else wants to be happy with Fuutarou and their family. Ichika wants him all to herself. His happiness be damned. She asks him to skip school with her. Any normal guy would take her up on the offer, but he's the top of the class nerd who is also their tutor and class rep who is working his ass off so that he can be acknowledged by their father. This highlights two things. First is Ichika's own desperation and how in her arrogance she's only objectified Fuutarou and hasn't considered how he feels. Second is that the reason she is desperate is because she believes she has nothing else. Nino is a great cook with an affectionate personality. Miku is quiet and kind and pushes herself to be better. Yotsuba is athletic, energetic, and has a desire of undying support for the people she loves. Itsuki is sensible, hardworking, and nurturing. Ichika believes that all she has is her looks and her charms. Two things Fuutarou doesn't give a damn about. And the tragic part is she's wrong. Fuutarou does admire her. He admired her for being a good, supportive older sister willing to become the peacemaker back when Nino and Itsuki didn't like him. But all the things Fuutarou admired about her are all the parts Ichika is setting aside in her quest to tear Fuutarou away from her rivals. Ichika gets bombarded when they enter the classroom, and it's here we see why she's fallen for Fuutarou. It's because he's so much more difficult to please that his simple actions make her heart beat faster than any of her fans. She gets pestered enough to where she ends up slipping into a Miku disguise to escape them, and for no other reason. I have to stress this because there is the idea of the end of this chapter and the arc that follows being character assassination. That's why I started this section talking about that. Ichika in this chapter is an opportunist. She puts on a disguise, and when Fuutarou doesn't see through it, she decides to lie and do something to tear Miku down. And in the next arc, she'll spend most of the time covering up this lie and doubling down on it. As she's doing so, the words of her sisters echo through her head, which also highlights that she has a fundamental misunderstanding of them and how far they'd be willing to go. And she's running these thoughts through her head just to justify how screwed up her actions are. I also love the stylistic choice here in the manga where her speech bubbles slowly blacken as she lays down the lie. By the time she says it's not a lie, it's a fully inked black bubble with white text. Fuutarou knows how Ichika feels now, and in a fucked up way, Ichika didn't lie. The lie is that she is Miku saying this. When she says Ichika is in love with you, the speech bubble is still pure white, which indicates that there was no lie there. And the more of a lie the statement is, the darker the speech bubble gets. So when she says the rest, the truth, as I interpret it, is that Ichika doesn't actually think they're good for each other, and that she won't be happy with screwing over her sisters like this. All that is a lie. But now that line has been crossed and there's no way of taking it back. We see that in parts of Chapter 75. Ichika manages to convince her sisters that getting presents for Fuutarou might distract him and cause him to fail at his goal. This means that she can become special by being the only one who gets him a present. Of course, Nino is wise to her game, having lost her trust after the scrambled eggs arc. Meanwhile, Fuutarou is stressing about his own lack of study time, the low results he's getting out of the girls, and now he has to contend with Ichika's feelings and how Miku has been acting. And we also see how hard this is for her. After all, now in order to keep up appearances, she can't allow Fuutarou and Miku to talk about what happened. Not only that, but Nino is unstoppable and isn't giving Ichika any opportunity to gain ground. Both of them get guilt-tripped by Yotsuba, who was secretly making paper cranes for Fuutarou per a Japanese superstition that making 1,000 paper cranes can cure any ailment. She apologizes for doing something that seems so underhanded, completely oblivious to how purposely underhanded Ichika and even Nino have been about this. Miku also comes clean after this, and Ichika is forced to change her strategy. She convinces them to hold off on giving their presents, but Nino protests, and her reasoning is telling of her familial personality. She wonders if Ichika is really okay with this. Ichika claims that none of them understand Fuutarou, which is why she was just going to give him money. The irony of this is that she's 80% right. Ichika, Nino, Miku, and Yotsuba don't really understand how Fuutarou feels right now, but Itsuki actually does, which is why the next scene shows her giving him an energy drink so he can carry on just a little longer. The mock exams are first mentioned in Chapter 71 in conjunction with the school trip that'll serve as the setting of the next arc. True to form, Fuutarou calls it the main event of the first semester. The mock exams is the chosen competition between Fuutarou and Takeda, the two best students in class. At the end of Chapter 72, Takeda even taunts him in the bathroom, offering to take the girls off his hands so he can fully dedicate himself to studying. The indication being that he was only top of the class because he cut himself off from social life. And in Takeda's mind, why would he continue to shackle himself? Takeda knows about Fuutarou and he knows about the Quints. What he doesn't know is how much they have impacted and changed each other. He thinks Fuutarou is exactly as he was before and is only tutoring them for the money. Chapter 73 is called New Kawanakajima, a reference to a series of battles between Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin. For a little extra historical spice, Miku's phone background that exposed her as a nerd all the way back in Chapter 3 is the Takeda family crest, which was done to set her up as Fuutarou's first adversary, but I know you weebs are going to take this as evidence to ship Miku and Takeda. This fateful clash between Fuutarou and Takeda is the first time Fuutarou himself has been tested. Sure, he'd have the occasional internal conflict, but for the most part he's been the one doing the testing. Obligation and his own growing fondness of the girls is why he stuck around this long. This is the first time that someone has given him an easy out. He could focus on his grades, get an easier job, and thanks to Takeda, he wouldn't have to worry about the Quints either. Fuutarou manages to shut Takeda down by pointing out that he is now employed by the girls themselves, and so it's ultimately up to them. And since he knows about Nino's feelings and maybe a few of the others, he knows they won't let him walk out on them. During the next study session, Ichika is absent and Itsuki is still too embarrassed to admit that she has become a food critic. Their confidence on their scores have grown. The mock exam isn't that much more difficult than their prior final exam, and their final graduation exam won't be that much more difficult than the mock exam. The end goal Fuutarou has been hoping for is insight. Sadly, they're all idiots who have been trying to balance studying with work. Just as they're attempting to go over all the stuff they've gotten wrong on the study sheet, their father drops in with Takeda by his side. Takeda scored higher than Fuutarou on the final exams. Fuutarou, who used to cling to the top spot so adamantly, let the crown slip from his fingers while helping the girls. And he's been so focused on their problems that he didn't even notice. In Maruo's eyes, he is no longer the exceptional student he was a year ago. But Maruo must realize, just as Takeda realizes, that he's only lost his place at the top because of the girls. If Takeda tries tries to replace him, his grades may suffer just as much, if not more, since the girls will surely be extra difficult. No, Maruo is still holding a grudge against Fuutarou. Hell, he's out of his depth here since Fuutarou hasn't been under his employ and the girls haven't been living exclusively by their father's means since the end of 7 Goodbyes. But this is why Takeda is so interesting. He is fond of the girls and he holds Fuutarou in reverence. He rubs it in here, but as this arc and the next unfold, you get the impression that Takeda is just competitive. But he's not as concerned with being the top student. He's rich. His father practically owns the school. He's already set for life. Being one of the smartest kids in the country is just a bonus for him. He also seems naturally fond of the girls and is always respectful to them no matter the situation. But he knows how poor Fuutarou is and how much he's driven to be the best so that he can eventually have the best life he can. Fuutarou needs that top spot more than Takeda does, which is why he offered to switch places with Fuutarou in the first place. Takeda has already had his moment of triumph. He's willing to fall back into second place. Sadly for him, Fuutarou has been completely dismissive of him. Turns out he didn't care that much about class rankings so long as he kept getting perfect scores. Ichika is the first to call Maruo out on this ulterior motive and makes the bold claim that she'll get better grades than any of the third years. Spoiler alert, she does not do this. In fact, we don't get their individual scores like we did in the final exams, but nobody ever says Ichika did any better than any of her sisters, so she was probably in third place again. Nino and Miku both speak up about Fuutarou's employment, and then Takeda lets his own motives slip. It's their fault he became an ordinary student instead of an exceptional one. He's got his own life to live. They're all just being selfish. But as they said at the end of 7 Goodbyes, they know they're selfish, and are going to keep being selfish if it means staying together. Fuutarou confirms this and turns their allegations on their head. Yes, it's their fault he's become ordinary, but that's not a bad thing. It's thanks to them that he's grown as a person, even if it meant having slightly less than perfect scores for once. All the facts and all the books he memorized, and it wasn't until he took this job that he realized how dumb some people can be and how dumb he really was. He is under no obligation to stay, but his pride and selfishness won't let him call it quits. He still sees himself as the best man for the job and even makes a wager that he'll be the top-ranked student in the country. The girls convince him to temper his expectations. They want him to wager that he'll be the best in their school, but that's no different than before, so they compromise. If he can breach the top 10 nationally, Maruo will accept him as their tutor once again. Fuutarou runs himself more ragged than ever, and all the problems pile on due to the growing drama between the girls. But in all their short-sightedness, Ichika shows how much she understands him. She's the only one who understands that Fuutarou cares more about what lies at the end of success than the success itself. He didn't become an A student for the prestige. He did it so he has the best chance of getting into a good school and getting a good job that can support his family. Fuutarou begins to tell Ichika about what's been going on before he passes out. But then we get this line adding to the overall mystery of Ichika's feelings, which will become clear by the end of Sisters' War. And as he wakes up on his birthday, he sees 5 paper cranes the girls made him with passable test results, showing him that he is not alone in all this. Which is also what was in the message Ichika gave him as Rena during 7 Goodbyes. The mock exams themselves go by pretty quickly in Chapter 76. We see Fuutarou more exhausted than ever before. The quints aren't far behind. Every panel is expertly put together to emphasize this point. We are seeing these characters at their absolute limit, and standing at the top of the stairs is Takeda casting taunts at them. Fuutarou isn't alone, but Takeda continues to claim that his connection to the girls made him weak. Going back to that little historical bit, it was the Takeda clan that ultimately got the best of the Kawanakajima battles. It's here that we do something the manga has never done up to this point, and we start seeing the story from Takeda's perspective. When he's not around Fuutarou, he is actually calm, composed, and humble. He even admits to some classmates that he may have gotten a question wrong, which would be enough to make the top of the school, but Fuutarou always set his sights higher, so he must do the same. His father, who runs the school, encourages him to cheat. He wants Takeda to meet Maruo's expectations. If he does, he'll have an easier path to becoming a doctor like his mother. Maruo and Takeda's father are both rather comfortable using their wealth and influence to dictate results, but Fuutarou never had that option, and it's here that Takeda shows his true colors. After a single page catching up with the girls, we see Takeda confront Fuutarou in the bathroom. Again, kind of a running thing. He shows Fuutarou the envelope with the test answers, showing Fuutarou just how powerful the rich elite can be. And then he tears it to pieces and flushes it down the toilet. We even see a sign forbidding this, further showing that Takeda does not care about wealth or fame and has no desire taking any shortcuts in life. He's just naturally competitive, and he's that way because he wants to be an astronaut. Only the best and the brightest can find success in such a field where they have nobody pulling strings. And so results brought from cheating have no merit to him. Even though Fuutarou rushes to the toilet again, he accepts Takeda's challenge, marking the first time he ever actually acknowledged Takeda as a rival and not just a pawn in Maruo's schemes. After that, we finally get to the results. The Quints did painfully average, which is a massive improvement over where they were before. Takeda did exceptionally well, placing 8th nationally, with the near perfect scores all around. Meanwhile, Fuutarou placed 3rd, with perfect scores in the first 4 subjects and nearly perfect scores in the final subject, where he only faltered because he passed out. Had he not driven himself so harshly, he would have placed 1st nationally. This means that Maruo is now forced to acknowledge Fuutarou as an exceptional student once again, just in time for the most emotionally riveting arc of the entire series. This concludes part 9 of my quintessential breakdown of Quintessential Quintuplets.